Morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
All right. That's great. I don't know who else is going to show up. But, I hope everyone had a good week. Well, if we want to jump right into updates, Jesse's prepared a Notion document. It's in the general channel in the Slack, so you can do that. Pick that up and take notes in it if you want. So I don't have any updates right now, but we can go through. Who wants to go first? Oh, hello.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, how are you?
So, yeah, I'm good. So, basically, the previous week, I was preoccupied with a hackathon, which is called Hackverse. So, basically, me and my friend, we collaborated on developing an alarm app, which we call it as AlarmX. So, the goal is basically to create a alarm app such that usually what happens is when we set an alarm, suppose we set an alarm for 6:30 a.m. So, the alarm rings and we just turn it off and go to sleep again. So what we are planning is, suppose you set an alarm for 6:30 a.m. and you give a buffer time as 5 minutes. So you have time from 6:30 to 6:35 a.m. to get up. And the alarm doesn't just turn off normally. You have to complete a task. Maybe you have to walk 30 steps or take a selfie or something so that the app is ensured that you're completely awake and only then the alarm will turn off. So that is one of the features we were planning. And the second feature we were planning is for a group alarm. Like if 2 to 3 people or if just 2 people want to get up at 6:30, so they both have to complete the tasks. And if suppose one of your partner fails to get up, so you can also send him a secondary alarm just to ensure that he's also awake. And so basically we talking in terms of completion, we implemented all the basic alarm features, and we have also implemented the group alarms to a good extent. So that is what I did previous week. Apart from that, I couldn't do much last week. I was mainly preoccupied with building this app. So in the upcoming week, I plan to get back to researching on methods to analyze the open source sustainability and regain touch with it. So yeah, that's it.
That's great. Yeah, sounds great. Thank you. Yeah, that sounds like an interesting project for the hackathon. What hackathon was it? Like through your school or?
I found it on a site called DevFolio.
Okay.
It was in it was in the neighboring state college, so we traveled there and attended.
Oh, all right. So it was an in-person hackathon.
Yeah, it was in person, 24-hour hackathon.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, I like hackathons. They give a good, you can do a lot of problem solving during the hackathon, and it's a good experience. So great.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's
I
cool.
can go ahead. Oh,
Okay.
no, go ahead, Jesse.
No, I was just saying that's cool.
I don't really have any updates. We did not have the cognition features reading this past week, which is fine. I did take the time to figure out and answer my own questions about Heinz von Forester's demons from the previous cognition features meeting. That was the topic of one of the papers that we read, and I felt like I appreciated the philosophical importance of the demons, but I did not understand the details. And now I feel like I do understand the details. They were basically, it's like a riff on Maxwell's demon. And there's 2 of them, and they're supposed to explain self-organization. So if you also want to learn about this later, I typed up some notes, and I also tried to connect my iPad to Jitsi so I could illustrate with the stylus, and it worked when I did it by myself. So maybe I can try that later.
Yeah, let's do that. That sounds great. Thank you. Yeah, we didn't have our meeting this week, but that's okay. We should take a break every once in a while, I guess. But But yeah, that's great. I'd like to see that.
Sure. Yeah, whenever.
Yeah, I would like to do that later today. Sorry, my update is basically, it took me a long time to recover from traveling and everything. It's hard to believe. Like last week at this time, I was like wielding my computer and walking around NYCWiC. It's in Lake George, New York. There's Fort William Henry is the venue, not this town. But it was a good time, and I might say a little bit more about that in general as an overall recap for the event. But yeah, very happy that it happened. We've had a couple people reach out afterwards showing interest in the lab. One of them looks really interesting. Is a cognitive science student who has done agent-based modeling. I don't remember if they have a history in biology as well, but they're doing like cognitive science and design work at Vassar, and it would be really interesting to. I believe they'll be reaching out soon. They reached out to me elsewhere, and I told them to kind of, hey, get to know our lab and talk to Bradley and stuff.
Yeah.
So there's been a few other people reached out as well. Really good feedback from our event so far. For those who are interested in helping with NYCWiC in the future, there are opportunities as well. I'll say more about that later on. Sorry about the Cognition Futures. It just didn't work out for me, and I kind of needed a break. But I'm extremely excited about both the things that Amanda's talking about, and also just where the project is in general. I feel like it's tough when it's one of those situations in life where you will kind of be intellectually and even emotionally drawn to what you want to do. Like, yes, I can't wait to just settle down and do this. And sometimes you get to that space and you just realize you're completely fatigued and your creative capacity is shot and you can't do it. And it's so frustrating. But that's part of it. That's part of like the academic and research life, is realizing sometimes that will happen and you can't beat yourself up about it. It's just, you need space and time to collect and restore and do things. So that's a little bit of where I'm at with that. But I am extremely excited about the management of where things are and the project development that we have, the different pieces that are coming together. Also, as Cognition Futures, and as far as SET, or Society, Ethics, and Tech Group, it was really nice. There's kind of a, I don't know, so SET, out of everything that in the lab that I've done, has kind of been this it's unique, and it's sort of been this thing that survived because of this sort of cyclical, yearly thing we do at NYCWiC and some other stuff, and now at We Robot as well. I did get back news about that. I'll talk about it later. But it's basically NYCWiC is, or SET is, it's done a lot, and I think it's nice. I really want to kind of think a little bit more about how I'm organizing that too, because what I'm doing is fine, but I think for certain projects there's kind of this, like the DEI paper project, which you might talk about a bit later too. There's a little bit of I don't know. I really want to give that the space and time it deserves, and so to do that, it's sort of structured in a specific way, and having other people have leadership in those areas as well. So that's a good thing, but it's been interesting to kind of see that bloom, and also realizing, on a more personal level update, like I have some grad school decisions to think about and make. And there's the element of a little bit on my mind this week has also been just kind of understanding the next level for some things that I want to do and seeing how people at that university or different universities are handling the kind of stuff I want to do, and really feeling like, you know, if I'm doing research at grad school or eventually a PhD, there's a certain way that people are going to do it, and that's fine. But also really understanding where it is I want to push and what kind of like my niche and what my aim is for the research that I want to do in the area that I want to do it. And I've had a lot of momentum in that area, but because the last week and a half has been so exclusively focused on NYCWiC and some other things, like also like my day job and all this stuff, it's sort of getting back on track. And so when you're getting back on track to a major event that you're coming out of, and also you're dealing with the burnout and the fatigue stuff and just all that things, there's sort of this, it's a very weird and uncomfortable period, particularly when you're doing like creative, harder, generative, almost artistic style work about pushing theories and ideas forward. So that's kind of the long and short of it. There's been some movement forward on slow movement, but good movement forward on plot twisters. One day I'll do a general intro to where that is, but a lot of it's building out sort of the models of how we're constructing some what we're calling emotions in the game, and it's not it's a different kind of a thing to do, but also like we're excited about eventually writing papers about these processes, like why are we designing the algorithm or what tools are we using in this way and what theories are supporting that or not. That's an exciting place to be about that. Other really general topics for their deep dives. I did mention in the Slack somewhere about professional development stuff and like LinkedIn or going over resumes and CVs, and there was I think Hussein responded to that. But I think one of the things from NYCWiC that I may segue into talking about NYCWiC now. I sort of I'll just share my screen, I guess.
Okay.
Because we've had introductions and kind of we'll go through this list in a second, but I'll just say some things as far as NYCWiC here. Basically, I don't know. One of the things I'm writing up. I can't really have a good way to show it easily right now. I'm doing a more like a long form recap of NYCWiC as well, where I'm going to kind of cover some just general topics in a slightly more narrative sense. Thank you for writing the Medium recap. Though,
yeah.
The longer form stuff is going to cover kind of a winding narrative of a few different things in the sense of some really good stuff on, let me look, actually, I have it right here. Major topics that I have are workplace advocacy or self-advocacy, and also sort of literacy about boundaries and burnouts. And I think that's kind of like that was sort of the hidden most important thing in the whole series. And it wasn't a keynote or anything, but I feel like I kind of wish everybody I wish it was sort of a keynote in some ways, or like something that everybody had access to, because I feel like that's actually one of the most important skills and concepts or like literacies to develop is sort of this, and it's kind of an interesting extension of our professional development stuff, and also some things we're doing about kind of future progression futures thing. But basically, the big concept here is it's important. Like a really great line from the talk. It was a smaller like breakout session talk, was about how you can get burnout from work. And it's not dependent on the number of hours that you've worked. Like it's not, you don't have to work 70 hours a week to officially be, oh, work is burning me out. You can work much less than that. You can work part-time. It's much more about expectations and explicit or implicit strains on someone. And there's also a lot of tension. This wasn't the main thing, but what I wanted to talk about, especially in our professional development, in our sense of communities and how like learning communities or even workplace communities function, there's a really important sense of, oh, am I feeling burnout and tension because there's just a lot of work and I'm not, and I have to manage my time better. I have to manage myself better. That's true, but also the more comfortable you are with your own personal boundaries that way, there's sort of an adjacent or coupled sense of understanding that having a clear sense of your own boundaries and needs and being able to have clear expectations from your manager and having a manager who's true you can trust about the expectations leads to a sort of literacy of what should a workplace dynamic be like. And there was, there's always a lot of the speakers had very good ways of talking. Like sometimes you can't leave a job because you need it, or you're in a stuck situation or whatever. You have to, sometimes you are stuck, and how do you manage that? But also a lot of healthy advocation. Like if you're not being respected in those ways, like it may be time to leave that job. But I really want to emphasize my own sense is sort of saying, like there's when we talk about boundaries and burnout on a personal level and understanding that it's okay, like there's a personal internal sense of what that looks like. There's also kind of an important literacy to develop how an organization should work as a whole, and being able to communicate your needs and boundaries to the admin, to the leadership, and also being able to kind of communicate or support other people, coworkers or friends who are dealing with burnout. The more you gain literacy about what an appropriate amount of energy expenditure, what emotional labor looks like, all this stuff in a specific all the different contexts for what these should be, and having like accurate and reasonable models internally for what those should be. And then you can share them with other people. Like that's a critically important thing. You want to obviously avoid burnout at work, and you want to understand. You want to get to a place where you have a good relationship with the management and all that things like that. But eventually, over time, and why it's really important for younger people, undergraduates, people who join in the workplace, is that it's important to really develop these models and these intuitions and these sense of, oh, I can have agency about addressing my boundaries with myself or with my supervisor, or understanding why I'm feeling burnout is because the workplace is not giving me reasonable expectations, is not communicating what I should be doing, is not acknowledging the effort that I do, or is overlooking and rewarding other people for overlooking my efforts in a way that's disregarding or being very unfair, and then disregarding the efforts that I'm outputting and kind of judging me because, putting a certain kind of external pressure on someone that is actually unfair, as opposed to just thinking, oh, I have a problem with managing myself. I think that's a really critical skill and literacy and conversation to develop. And so there was a really great talk about that. And I think I kind of am interested in emphasizing that we do a little bit in our professional development already, but continuing to say, how do we build this sort of literacy and skill set and knowledge of how to address these things is quite important. The next general segment of my review piece is just general advice gems. I happen to be on the My Job Is So Cool panel, and it was really amazing. I was with I didn't even realize who was on the panel, but one of them was like attorney for several years who went into cybercrime and is really experienced now as a director in that sense. One of them is the director of the national, one of the keynote speakers, and Bajorek. I can't remember her first name right now. But she's the president of the National Esports Association.
Okay.
And she gave a wonderful, amazing keynote as well. I wish the keynotes were recorded at the event. I don't think they were. But there was also someone who's a game graphics designer, and someone else, two other people actually that I can't quite remember how to describe, but were amazing. Everybody was amazing with their comments there. And just a couple takeaways from that were basically there was a big open question about mentoring and networking, and a lot of things about how people's, what was the coolest part of your job, what was the hard part of your job. But 2 points that I'll emphasize here for the networking and mentoring question. My mentoring story goes back to, for me, my whole trajectory of like interest in research changed because I had a good mentor who invested in me and gave me some chances to do things and led me through the process. And that's partly why I'm trying to do imperfectly, but like getting my own sort of like mentoring, building out the mentoring program here and doing things we're doing here. I'm not in that direction. And then networking, so like really kind of having enough, putting yourself out there enough that eventually you find a good mentor, and then a lot of magical things happen when you find that person who will invest in you and who can kind of say, here's a constructive way, or we can build movement on a project. Like that makes all the difference. And networking, my point about networking basically was continue to find and reach out for groups of people that actually care about what you want to talk about and do and build in the world, because they exist. They may not be the most popular, or they might not be easily accessible. And especially if you were like first gen person like I was, or didn't have a lot of background or people in the field already, and you're kind of transitioning into a place from little exposure to finding that, oh yeah, people talk about this. Like a big deal for me about that was not just the conference I went at with my mentor, but also like places like Princeton Vision, where there are certain events, and unfortunately, I think Princeton Vision is kind of not happening anymore.
Yeah.
And that's partly why I love We Robot, because We Robot's sort of a little bit more career matured version of it, but the same atmosphere of bringing people together. But having these conferences where it's so challenging, because sometimes your initial exposure to a field or a topic will seem really unappealing, just because how people are addressing that ideology or that approach or that method or that culture they have in it. And it's so important to find other people talking about stuff very seriously in a way that matters, or is inclusive, or that is addressing it morally the way you want to. Like I feel like until you like the way we can help each other out in that sense is by trying to connect those dots. Because if people don't have a sense that they can do any of those things, or that they can't, that you can't find a community, and it's just like you and a couple friends talking about stuff the way you want to, it just changes. It just changes from, oh yeah, I'm going to talk about AI ethics to my film university. No, here's a whole community around it. Or here's someone, oh yeah, I think I'd like to, this matters in the world to me, and I care about this, but I don't have a lot of outlets for it, versus finding a group of friends who are kind of try to make an app or a hackathon, or do a startup, or think about making a project. Like when you get to these other communities that let you actually build things and create stuff, that's when it changes. And it's so important to kind of communicate that, because a lot of times, especially the way a lot of like contemporary education is, it's kind of like, here are the options, choose from this organization or this approach. And then you have to build success by doing stuff in that arena. And that's probably true to some extent. That's a conventional way to have conventional credibility and do stuff. But it's not the only way. And especially for like your aspirational stuff, finding communities around that, I think, is irreplaceable. Another point is, and this is like a general professional development thing, if anybody's ever at work, especially if you're in a less privileged situation because of your background or an identity or just being a new person, keep records of troublesome situations. This is kind of my advice in the group too. And not just why is it important to keep records or make email chains or document stuff, is because, especially if you're on the fence, like, I don't know, is this really a problem? Or someone said this thing, or like one place at a job I was at, someone was very antagonistic towards me for whatever reason. And it kind of was just enough to be like, well, that's just how they are, right? Or like, oh, this person's that way, you know. But it kind of got to the point and kept happening over and over time. So I'm glad I did, although I wish I started a little bit sooner. Basically saying, get the email chain, talk to HR, or at least make some notes for yourself. Ideally, you can talk to a functioning HR staff or a mentor or a boss or somebody there. But if not, still keep notes, because what seems like a little bit problematic now may escalate over time. And if you can show the trajectory, not just because I'm all about trajectories, but if you can show the timeline and the trajectory of the development of problematic situations, that's a great defense for you. And you know, a way to protect yourself, and a way to also get it out of the space of, is this really a problem? Is this all in my head? Is this really a factor? Like, just make some notes about it, document it, because it will help in many ways. So that's a really important piece of advice that came up with that discussion with all those great people. And then lastly on this topic, I'll say, those who may remember a few weeks ago, or I don't know, a month ago now, we had a conversation about demo or die, or deploy or die as a concept. And that's really good. But there's also a kind of an article to be written about, like, going deeper than demo or die, which I'm slowly writing about. I don't know, creating a constructive feedback, a community around constructive feedback, so that even when you're demoing your project, that you know, like, in-house you can have a robust and strong environment that's caring, but like tending to the in-house community of how do we talk, how do we address stuff, and understanding there's sort of a very critical way of having discussion that's important to be exposed to, because sometimes in the external world you will have massive flack, or people are going to give you crap and no one's going to care, or like you're going to have to very strongly justify yourself. But also just like how do you create an environment where you train the agency of the person giving the talk, the demo itself, and also train the community to support that too. And it comes up in so many different ways, but I like demo or die is always. I'm in the back of my. This is a slight tangent, and then I'll move on. But like in the back of my mind, I'm thinking a lot about like a lot of academic, particularly academic or research. I think there's like research, product development, entrepreneurial stuff, startup stuff. There's kind of it's almost like being a professional athlete in certain ways, in that there's an element of maintaining your time and maintaining like your body or your productive capacity. And there's also sort of there's a public component that I feel is maybe it's talked about most in sort of entrepreneurial settings, but even as an academic person, there's sort of a skill set of learning how to, even this will sound kind of strange. Even at the job panel that I was on at NYCWiC, I was so focused on I had kind of bad timing. My research presentation for our lab was immediately following that. And I was also a volunteer. So all of my stuff got crammed into it. And it was just this moment of like, when we're starting, okay, we're going to sit down and do the panel. Let's introduce ourselves and talk about ourselves. I kind of blanked. And it was this sense of, I'm lucky I have sort of enough experience now to know how to recover from that and keep going with it. But there's sort of this sense of having to maintain your elevator pitches about either who you are or a project or an event, and like having this sort of on deck narratives that you can easily convey to people. That came up again at the conference. Like it can be about, like in my case, it could be about the lab. It could be about my schooling. It could be about plot twisters. It can be about artist futures, right? Or the society ethics tech team. And what like very simple, like very extremely simple narratives to convey to people. Like that it's sort of how do you have to kind of go about your daily life, and then it's like it's almost like you're in a video game or a movie where you could have the random encounter, and it may not be the most important thing in the world, or it could be. You don't really know what you're going to be encountered with, but you kind of have to have something ready to go. So that's a little dive into demo or die stuff, but always something to keep aware of. Last few things about the conference I mentioned are, I was actually really impressed with the keynote speaker and the esports talk. And it's interesting to think about esports as not just professional gamers. You know, like there's also, like if you play basketball, it's not because you are destined to go to the NBA or be a professional basketball player. So you may just like the sport. And kind of transitioning from getting people, especially people who maybe aren't the most able-bodied or people who aren't conventionally using their body as the vehicle they want to do stuff in the world, really focusing on inclusivity, as accessibility and things like that, and how that creates spaces for organic learning. And I thought that was actually quite interesting thing to do. Like, how do you make learning more accessible and more engaging in different formats? There are a lot of stories about education that came up that were great. Also reminded me a lot of plot twisters, which is sort of very heavily organic learning, play-based, like play as organic learning. This sort of, a lot of things developmentally to go into there, and a lot of things education-wise to go into there. But I'll just say that was a really cool talk, and if you want to talk about that more later, you can do that in Slack.
Yeah.
And then finally, I do want to make a little bit more of one thing I would like to change, or in the future, is sort of how do we write about our CVs? Yes, how do we put something on LinkedIn, which is more of a digital version of a CV, or making a personal website? But also it's kind of the concept of branding in general, and how do you brand and talk about your what you're doing in a public space. I think that's something that NYCWiC, that didn't happen as much as I'd like it to. And if I'm involved, I'll probably be involved next year as a lower level co-organizer again. But I would like to make something specifically about that, of like, how do you do it? What the hell do you do with social media now? Social media is so messy. But there are ways to do it, and I think, frankly, it is tougher as a woman in certain spaces. We had a great talk from Valeria about the troubles of being an online person, the troubles of being someone who's remotely public, even an academic, and putting yourself on the internet, and why it's so hard, and why there's a lot of problems. So you can see Valeria's talk about that to kind of see a little bit of those issues. But also, like, how do you do it? You know, like how do you use Twitter? I'm really happy with what Twitter was for me like a couple of years ago, and now it's changed, and it kind of is not as fun for me. But it's still a great place to network, and I stay very much in one lane, and I try very hard to just black all the other stuff out and talk to other people there. But just how do you deal with that? How do you present? How do you talk about it? How do you engage it? How do you develop a network that way? How do you find opportunities that way? Those are all things I think are really important that the NYCWiC didn't really cover. And I would like I think as young people going into new careers and heavily all that stuff. Like that's so super critical to do. So we may talk more about that in the future. But overall, NYCWiC was great. NYCWiC was very, it's so important. For people who don't know, NYCWiC is basically designed for first-time people, for first-time presenters, first-time going to any conference. We had some of the chaperone leader people saying, this was such a great experience. This is the first time some of our students have ever been away from home ever. So really, really focused on having an environment that was safe, supportive, inclusive, creating a sense of belonging, the DIB and the belonging to, which is related to one of our papers that we're trying to write with Jen and the ethics team. There's a sort of look at, I'm going to segue into talking about we're doing kind of a review slowly of tech ethics boards and also DEI initiatives, which kind of have some overlap in terms of things they're trying to do organizationally, and what's the kind of status of that? What are maybe better practices for that? It came up a little bit in our talk at NYCWiC, but we will be working more on that. And we have tentatively we're going to have an actual society ethics tech group meeting to talk about that paper next week or two, and move that forward. So more on that front in the future. But NYCWiC is really great. I appreciate everyone's effort for putting that together and supporting that, and making space for it, and letting us talk about it. Thank you so much for Ankit. It was a great presentation. I don't think he's here right now.
No.
A great talk. It was really well paced. Thank you, Bradley, for putting together the overview and a great talk as always. Even thank you, Brian. I know Brian's not here right now, but Brian put a lot of effort into these projects over time, and was a great speaker and presenter last year. And of course, thanks to Valeria and also Jen. Jen did a lot of great work on the the NIH open data DMS policy for kind of a lot of just to say this briefly, a lot of federal emphasis is being put on, especially in the health fields or doing bio research, making your data manageable, open, shareable, fair data, and really tying that to funding now. Like it's not just sort of an idea; it's being more and more focused on as for grants, funding, for accepting research, like making sure your data is managed and shareable and taking care of it is going to be a big deal, especially for grad students and people going into the new norms now. There's major legislation passed earlier this year. Not legislation, but like policies that have been enacted and said this is now the mandate going forward. So yeah, and it covers everybody. Yeah, NYCWiC was great. Any questions I can say about that? I know I kind of gave a dump.
Yeah. So thanks for that recap. Actually, I'm going to share my screen in a minute here. We last week actually I did in the project management course. I talked about a couple slides on demo or die. So if you go back to the recording for last week, that's going to be on there. It's basically a little assessment of demo or die from like an article that was written on like the process of demo or die. So it's basically like you're in a working group. It actually originated at the MIT Media Lab, and it they have these working groups where you're like in a agile type situation, and you want to give reports on your progress, and so you do a demo, and it either works or it doesn't. And so, having a demo weekly or monthly, it can help you. If you do a demo and it doesn't work, you can diagnose what went wrong, or if it went well, what went right. In a lot of, like, I say the media lab because in a lot of graduate school contexts, if you're in a research lab, the director of the lab will often go around to people with projects and say, can you demo this project for a visitor? So they'll have you'll have to do a demo, and then you hope it works. even if your project is a trash fire, sometimes the demo can work. And so, it's fine, but that's where that comes from. And so I like the idea of being able to do like a working proof of concept to demonstrate it, on a regular basis and showing your progress and demonstrating things like that. I think it's helpful, but I think that's maybe, not the only way to do it, because it is actually quite stressful for the team, because if you continue to fail, it's a problem if you can't diagnose what's wrong. And so there are ways of, I don't know, there are ways around that too. So it's not always the best strategy for going about showing what you're doing, or showing that what you do works, or assessing advancement or progress.
Yeah, there's the weird thing about demo or die in that sense. Like, if it's this mix between if there's sort of a regular. I think back to I came up last week talking to Plutch's people. I cited Bradley's famous line of momentum is or can be more important than progress.
Yeah.
In that sometimes a lot of times, especially for certain things, your what you can convey externally as progress is not, often not linear, but also like it's this weird tension, because, and this is part of why I wanted to focus on the environment in deeper and demo die, because if your environment is making people feel like putting this certain expectational pressure that, yeah, you got to consistently show a project, hey, this is what you showed last week, this is crap, like you got to do better, like this, you're not giving us any updates, that kind of energy, I don't think it's important to know what to do with that energy, because in some environments and in some projects and in some timelines and in some budgets, you have to know how to address that energy. Like certain things are going to be that way. Do all environments and all situations and all ways of handling obligations and progress need to be that way? No. So understanding what do you do with that? Like as someone in a leadership position about those things, do you want to? There is a time and a place where you have to be harsh, like about the restraints, about the constraints of the situation. But I feel like it's also really important to know, like, your job as developing people up in that sense is getting them to understand, like, it's sort of this blend of, do you want to emphasize that very harsh lens? Do you want to have like a medium or different kind of lens where you're encouraging this, but also you're understanding if someone gives, if you want to have regular talks or updates, it's sort of a sense of, should that be, and I think this will come a lot in potential segue to Google Summer Code. There's a lot of check-ins and timelines and things there, and Bradley's often said, hey, make sure you have kind of some different plans of attack if something doesn't work, or like understand the timeline. This may take one of the things, or if this goes faster, what are you going to do with the spare time, and all these kind of things like that. That's I don't think that's necessarily always the most focused on part of Google Summer Code, but that's an extremely important part of, like, how do you manage irregular, strange development. And like a lot of development or any kind of research project can be that way. Like, you may not be on this linear path. And how do you have check-ins where you're both offering the means by which to communicate publicly or externally, even if it's in-house, like these means by which you can do that, versus say, it's you don't want to squash production capacity and hope and sense of development, but also what's the right line of giving people something to rise to the occasion to. And I feel like as a mentor, like if you're just running a business situation and you're focused on being very results, okay, that's kind of its own thing. But if you're trying to grow in the capacity of that, it's really a level of like meeting where people are and lifting up and saying, okay, here's the next level you can attain. And I feel like that's an extremely important part of everything. So, yeah.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen here. Let's see. I wanted to go over the post that I did for the recap.
Yeah.
So this is the NYCWiC 2023 recap. So last week's meeting, this is a screenshot from like the first 5 minutes. Jesse was walking through the conference venue, and he like showed a picture into like one of the meeting rooms here where they're doing the main session, and then the poster session is off to the side. And so we got a live look at NYCWiC. But so this is the conference. This is the famous chair that they use for the conference, and it's had a lot of nice cutting edge topics from what I saw from the conference program. This is on the lab Medium. So if you want to follow along, it's on the Medium. It's the top post right now. This is our session here, a screenshot of our session where it looked like it was standing room only. And Jesse did a very good job of presenting these talks in this session. You were going to say something?
It was definitely packed. And I'm just for those who weren't aware last time, like I could not record anything. And it was very disappointing that the projector setup was very, very, very old school. And I don't think I couldn't even record it on my screen because I had to put my screen on this separate thing, and it was kind of a mess. But it did go well, and it was very well received. So thank you everyone for help with that.
Yeah, and then we had we met up with Samantha Carollo, who is an intern here last spring, or I guess in spring of 22. And so she wrote a blog post, and she did she attended a lot of meetings, and I think she learned a lot here, but she's doing very good, very well. Looks like she's got, she was all set for the conference. So great. Good to see her.
Yeah. Yes. Sam was really professional. I feel like she's ready to take on the world. Really amazing person. A lot of our interns have been really great too, and I really thank for that whole program. But Sam was pretty legit and really cool to meet. So if you see this, Sam, big thumbs up for you, and all success to you in the future.
Yeah. And so Jesse is trying very hard to look like Yuri Marcus here.
Yeah.
And he posted in the Slack, like he was making that point, and I said, whatever happened to cognitive science individuality?
Very nice.
Because we like the whatever happened to cognitive science article. Anyways, we have a playlist on YouTube of the different talks. So Jesse has it on his YouTube channel, and I have it on the lab YouTube channel. There's a playlist where we have actually Jesse did an introductory talk, and he may do a recording of that, which goes over the introduction to the project, which would be nice to have, like the current state of it. We have one from late 22, but it's always good to have like these recap talks that kind of go, like from like season to season. So you do one for the open house in the fall of 22. And you can only do maybe 30 minutes, and it doesn't cover like the stuff that you're doing now, but this might be a little bit different set of topics. So to have those where people can kind of pick up the themes, you don't have to dump it on people at once. You can kind of visit them as they're relevant. Those are good to have. So that's one, and then Ankit Grover and Aiden Tripodi did this talk, Ethical Implications of Programmatically Generated Content, which is a discussion of generative models and AI and some of the ethical issues surrounding those, like training set data and things like that. It was a very good talk, very timely, and I hope that we can follow up on that theme a little bit more in the future. I talked a little bit about open source and the ethics of open source, especially with respect to some of these generative models, but also just open source and how projects evolve, and how you need to consider things like licenses and other things that come into play. So that's the talk I gave. Valeria Schnacke presented a talk called Law and Artificial Intelligence, and this is a nice set of topics. Again, this is something very timely. There are a lot of issues that we can stake our minds to, I guess. And so this is very timely. And then open data, open science, and diversity, equity initiatives, DEI, which is, Jesse informed me, it's DEI /B or DEI -B for belonging. But this,
we didn't know what to put in the topic there.
Okay.
but there's also like DEI. I think there's also DEIAB now too. There's a few other acronyms, but B is belonging is kind of becoming more the thing too, which is not just making sure you have access, but like actually creating a sense where your actual sense of belonging in a space, which is kind of related to what I talked about earlier. And Valeria's talk was really good about privacy and how it was a very it was a brief introduction to data rights and privacy, and how that's kind of being challenged by a lot of the things you can just automatically generate on the internet now, and a little bit of a lens about how it's a bit of a gendered issue in terms of there can be major disparities in terms of how the impact is handled for women having a particularly different or unique set of challenges that maybe is something to keep in mind. I actually did a nice overview of that. And then in my talk, I was going to talk a little bit more about a brief thing on like OpenAI versus DAIR, which are like different approaches for AI development, which you kind of covered very briefly, but it was mostly about, like I said, the NIH's open data policies and federal mandates to that end, and how does that work, and tying it a little bit into our open source sustainable communities efforts from the past, and Google Summer Code efforts too, and then referencing the DEI paper that we'll talk more about later. But yeah, thanks so much, Bradley, for putting all this together. There are more pictures coming out. So I'm kind of waiting to post my longer form thing when those pictures come out.
Yeah,
they're not here yet, and we had the professional photographer who's sort of doing everything and showing it out. And if you're looking, oh yeah, here I am on the screen. I guess this is my to discuss joke at myself about I'm especially when I'm looking face at the camera, like in the thing there, it's like I've got the dark T-shirt and the dark jacket and the big glasses and an amazing smile that we all have. So that's fun. But yeah, really good stuff.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this issue, like, we talk about in terms of ethics for set, but it also is a set of design issues. So like it's a set of ethical issues if you want to think about like, how maybe to bring these issues up and into people's consciousness. But like if you want to really kind of drill down to like how would you implement some of these better ways of doing things, it is a set of design issues. And so, that's a different ball of wax though. And so we have to, if maybe we pick this up and move it in that direction to have like maybe some ways that we could, and this could be like a preprint or another talk to another group, another conference where we can do those kind of issues. I've been thinking about this for the project management course, and I'll get into that maybe in a little bit, but
yeah, I think that's very true, and I think that ties a lot into some of the people that I'm following who talk more regularly about like AI ethics, talk about it that way. It also is a really nice tie into our dear friend cybernetics and like systems design and design thinking and structuring of feedback loops, and what feedback loops are we having or not having. And yes, human in the loop in a broad sense and that's a nod to some We Robot discussions. But I think that is I think in terms of I think the DEI paper may be kind of a classic social science approach in a broad sense, or at least one part of that whole project. But I think what I would like to make it a bit more, I don't want to say technical, but to bring some. I think I really like a big yes to what Bradley said about let's talk about this from a lens of design incorporating the right feedback loops and who is at what part of the design process. I think is a really important lens. And then we can talk about from a variety of ways in terms of what we do in the lab too, from like education onto actual like project development of software or other research projects too. So,
yeah. So yeah, that's great. So why don't I move on here to? It looks like Raj had to leave. Thank you for
GSOC stuff, and then we can move on. Like I
no, we're not going to talk about GSOC stuff today, but okay. I'll talk about project management and some other things here before, and then we'll go to Amanda. And so okay.
I'll just quickly mention. Pretty much, we're pretty good on deadlines. There is the FQXI competition that's still going. NeuroMatch, if you want to do anything with NeuroMatch, now's the time to apply. I think it closes in a few days for the summer school. You got computational neuroscience, deep learning, and climate tech course too. I think that's it as far as our deadlines. I did see something in the Slack that I might try to apply to, just to mention that really quickly. There's a summer series for AIII, which has these topics: AI, metaverse, building connections. These look pretty cool, so I'll check more of that later. But to be looked into. Okay. That's it.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Yeah, we should keep. Yeah, we kept tabs on the submissions. I know we're kind of we get like things. So I know NeuroMatch is coming up, and we need to. If people want to do that, I don't know what people's plans are for the. I know people are doing Summer of Code, of course, but NeuroMatch will also be happening. We'll probably do things for NeuroMatch too over the summer when we can, like maybe in the weekly meetings we'll do things. But we'll have to plan that out a little bit, and I don't know what to do this year. Last year we did like these very short, like. I don't know what you'd call them, like not a slow pod, but like a brief pod, where it's like, you have like maybe 20-minute encapsulation of what's going on that week. I don't know how useful that was to people, but it did it kind of like gave people a window into it. And then, you could say, oh yeah, that's interesting. We should follow up on that. We've talked about doing a slow pod for NeuroMatch for a while. It's been hard to get it off the ground. So I don't know what the demand is for that anyways. But there are a lot of ways we could do a slow pod. We could do like just kind of like use the materials any way we want, I guess. It's all about remixing. So I mean definitely, yeah, those are the window. Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's a good a good thing to have. But sometimes you get like there's so much stuff in a week that it's like you really have to, you can't do anything justice. So the window's good. The slow pods would be good, but the slow pods take a lot of time commitment. So it's really a matter of figuring out what people want.
Did you, Amanda, did you do it last year, or did you think about it? I know you're doing like some neuro stuff now. I don't know if it would benefit you or not. I was considering trying to do the deep learning one this summer, which I might still apply to.
I did not do it last year.
Okay.
I was thinking about it for this year, but I don't know if I have the room on my plate. And I think that it would be better if I like just selectively pick out the pieces that are relevant to what I'm doing.
Absolutely, because like all the cognition futures work and comparative phenomenology and embodied phenomenology work is just like extremely important, and that's what you should do the whole summer. No, that's a big joke. But yeah, no, I totally get that. But yeah, it is due to 2 days from now, probably like a day and a half. But I put it in general too. If you want to apply, strongly recommend it. It's a great thing to do for everybody. It's not a secret to everybody. It's a good thing to do for everybody.
Right.
And you check it out if you want to. I don't think the application bears that hard. I didn't look this year, but if you have questions about applying to this is public notice for all of our lab members. If you ever aren't sure how to apply to anything, you can say, hey, Jesse, Bradley, whoever, lab, can you help me apply to this thing? If you want feedback or advice on how to tailor your application, we can help you with that. So NeuroMatch is pretty accessible, but you want help, we're here. The end.
So yeah, that's great. So it's always a good time. Looks like Pratham was here and then he left, so I don't know. He didn't have
said
any
something that
updates.
came up urgently in the general chat and had to leave. So,
Okay.
but it's Chris, you were. Yeah, thank you for coming by.
Yeah, no, thanks for people who come by, and but we'll have the recording up later, so that's fine too. I'm going to go over some things here. The first thing I want to go over is something I found that's interesting. I didn't know about this. Maybe other people did, but so apparently, like we have a piece of technology.
Oh, wow.
This is an MMO. This is just an example of what I want to talk about. But so in like different projects that we have, there's like a lifespan, and MMOs are a good example of things that kind of like show up when they're released and they're really popular, and then they die off as things as time goes on, like Star Wars Galaxies. At one time it was like pretty popular, and then people stop playing it. But you still have this game that there's like a core of users who really like it. And so they're still using it. It's a very small group of people. So the question is like, what is the lifespan of an MMO? And so the first answer to that question is it could go on forever. You might have like a lot of users at the beginning of its life. And then, as time goes on, you get fewer and fewer users. They leave, they get bored or whatever. But you still have this core of users. And so the answer is they could never die. You could even make emulators for things like if you're old enough to remember the Amiga computer. The Amiga had a lot of games, and it was very well known in the late 80s and early 90s for being a graphics oriented computer. And so that, you were able to do a lot of gaming on those machines, and those games became very popular, but they were never really ported to other platforms. So people now, build emulators to play these games. And so, it's not a huge thing in the marketplace, but it's there. It's a niche. And so those games, in a sense, never die. They go out of print, but people still want to play them. So that's the answer to that. The second thing is that there's a sort of maintainer aspect to this, which is, we want to maintain these games or these platforms. We want to be able to support maybe a small number of people, and we want to have like some sort of way to emulate them, to port them to new technologies as those come along. So that's something that, if we have an open source organization, say, we can take this thing that maybe is somewhat popular, maybe it's very popular upon its release, and then it kind of goes, becomes very niche, or you have a core of users who are still interested, or sometimes it dies and then gets reborn. Like, sometimes things die off, or you stop doing them for a couple of years and then you restart them. And so all those things have special challenges to the maintainer. The maintainer has to be able to bring things back together. they have to maintain a very small group of people and so forth. So this is something that I noticed in this article. They talk about a lot of different platforms. The Sims Online is interesting because they're like you have basically different versions of the simulation or the game that are people like maybe the older versions because they have certain features. Now the Sims I think runs on a server, on an online server. It used to be something you would install on your machine. So some people like that better. It's better for the gameplay. And so these are sorts of things that we can breathe new life into with maintenance and things like that. So I find this fascinating just from the open source standpoint, from the maintainer standpoint, from the sort of technology evolution standpoint. So this is really interesting. And I think, it's worth revisiting this idea, not just in terms of open source software and in terms of maintenance and that, but also in terms of technology, but also in terms of academic work. There are a lot of areas of academic work that are obscure or get obscured over time. We run into this all the time in our groups. Like in our Cognition Futures group, we'll read a paper from like 40 or 50 years ago, and then you're like, well, what happened to this area? And well, it died off. People, their lab closed, or they stopped publishing, or they just moved on, and it just kind of sits there, and it never gets followed up on, or so that's the other thing is like it's this continuity aspect. So this is I think this is just like a sort of a seed for this larger theme, and I don't exactly know what to call that theme, but I wanted to bring that up.
The theme of like
I guess like life cycle, lifespan of things like that, like of platforms, of software, of ideas, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and you know what? And you probably thought about this much longer than this has probably been on your mind a lot. I realize when you're thinking about this. Also, oh, I forgot. I'm overly proud of this article.
Oh yes, so, yes, the cover.
But to your point, I haven't really thought about this like broad overarching concept between like sustainable development of open source, of what you just talked about with these different communities and like the online games and communities, and also ideas too. There's an interesting cycle of them, and sort of that's kind of why this is a major nod to me finishing, which is part of the note in the background. Frontier map, because I feel like frontier map is something to navigate all that. Like you have to, how do you get people to understand in this context, this was totally, hot. This everybody referenced this, but then things change. And why do they change? And there's a very irregular, non-linear development. And it's sort of like we want there, kind of like the centralized mindset wants there to be some magical ruler. That's sort of one of the reasons why ABM and NetLogo and all those things came about, was to kind of, we're gonna, hey, this isn't actually the case. There's a centralized ruler or a centralized mindset. We want there to be. And similarly, there's not really a clear trajectory. It's not just like, here's the straight line of development for AI, or anything, or like cognitive science. Every time I talk about cognitive science, I kind of laugh because I don't know how to talk. I have no idea how to refer to myself as a cognitive science interested person. But that's kind of why I'm laughing is because of what we're talking about. It's like, well, it kind of has meant this, and then people doing this, and so how do you convey that? How do you, if you're even to kind of go into demo or die for a bit, like what's your narrative? Like kind of like it comes down to like, what's your narrative that you're expressing about this topic right now, and how can you bring other people onto it? And how do you mesh that narrative into that weird like melting, brewing, non-linear melting pot that is all of the stuff we just talked about. So
Yeah.
that's my wrap.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted, Amanda, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I also wanted to add that I feel like this is especially true in philosophy, that you see like the same ideas get published over and over again without reference to their previous iterations. And in some cases, it's like, oh, well, these ideas are like, they're connected, but maybe it's like a high level connection. Maybe it's not obvious that, you know, the more recent paper should have explicitly built off the previous paper. But sometimes it seems like everyone just needs their own version with their own little tweaks of the same idea, and they want it to be, I don't know, it's like they need to own that, and so that it's like it does not get situated in the history of those ideas very well. It's presented as more novel than it is, whether that's like intentional because you need to publish because you need to keep your job, or if it's just because you can't read all the literature. I don't know, but you definitely see like the same like cycles of thought, and I think it impedes progress when each iteration doesn't have enough reference to the previous version.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't find the meme, but we probably have seen it where it's like, you know, the ancient philosophers like, oh, I want to refine my idea so that way I can understand nature, versus, oh, I want to refine my idea so I can be published in Nature. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
It's like, and I think that's a great point. Like, this is a deep dive into like a real, like, not just academia, not just research, but like at a kind of societal, civilizational level, like what we're tailoring our efforts towards is getting your name on the idea. And so in that sense, not to go back to Frontier Map again, but I'm pushing that forward too. But like the idea behind Frontier Map is we're kind of well, this is a little separate thing, but like we need to push new ideas forward, because we're running out of time. we can't play the game this way anymore because there's a lot of constraints that we're dealing with. So how do we like? I'm not putting that as like the motivation for Frontier Map is that, but like it kind of is in a little ways of just like we need to actually understand, okay, here's the idea, the class of ideas, we need to push it forward. And it's not hard. I mean, it's hard. It's hard work. It's not, people are, you know, fooling around and wanting to get their name in Nature, sure. But also like, it's hard. And I think at a industry or like whatever we want to call the sector, people are supposed to be pushing ideas forward rigorously. It's always been hard. It's always been hard. It's not easier now just because, you know, et cetera, soapbox aside. But yeah, I'm very glad you made the point. And I think I feel honestly extremely lucky, blessed that there's a space here where we're talking about it this way and doing some things about it, because I find that it's so disenfranchising in a lot of ways that people who have ideas to say, well, just here's how you got to approach that and do it in a way that kind of says you don't have any agency until like 40 more years in the field. So like, you know, just sorry for your ideas, like just literally copy and paste other people's ideas with a little extra on them and say it's just your feature, your add-on, and get some papers. Then maybe 50 years from now, like you can write a book. Like, okay, like here's your modified vocational path. Enjoy that. And like, and that's why, like, to the other side of the coin, like plot twisters, there are spaces that do it, It's just they tend to be in sort of startup or adjacent kind of things where you go do that, but then like that can be bound by the venture capital pressure. Do you want to get in co-investors? What are their aims? Like it's just so. I'll table the conversation, but I think it's really important one to periodically talk about as we're doing like actual theory building work, big paradigm questioning work. Like that's what we're up against.
And then the other thing is like, we borrow a lot of ideas from each other in academia, but we don't have a formal system of like, we have attribution like citations, but there's this idea of forking, of course, in open source where you fork things formally and you make changes. And that's kind of an interesting way. Maybe even to view like a frontier map where it's like a fork or something. I know it's an imperfect metaphor, but So the other thing that I kind of brought up from this is that there's this longevity that like you have things that get used. A lot of times they're technologies or even ideas that come into fashion really quickly and then die out. And, for no good reason. It's just like because, like a piece of technology, a piece of software, it's like a game, you could release a game and it could be popular for 6 months and then die. And you're like, well, the idea was good, but it's people saw it and it just exploded and then it died and then that's it. And there's a lot of use left in it, but we don't know how to leverage it because we're just, we don't, it's just trendy and trends kind of bury things sometimes when another trend comes along.
And that would be a wonderful thing to like write an article. Like I'm sure people have written about it.
Yeah.
But like I would love to write, and I'm over my own version, but like I would love to think a bit more about it in the sense of there's this, it kind of reminds me of my tracking across time stuff from cognition futures or like domains, but it's like a lot of times it's like the development of an idea it's almost like I'm using this term a lot in plot twisters land, but like we're kind of acting as a midwives to this game world and idea and functionality. And it's only existing because right now a very small handful of people, like kind of like the Margaret Mead quote about handful of people changes the world, but it's only because a handful of people right now are dedicating basically their free time, spare time to volunteer across like many different time zones. It's similar to our lab, but people are coming together to like create an artificial homeostasis, an artificial constancy to push the idea forward. And in that environment, it can grow. And without that, there's nothing. And sort of like these cycles of development for the MMR, the online games or the ideas are pretty much the same way too. And it's like, we don't really, I think future societies will actually grasp that concept quite a bit more than we do now and realize that is how there's kind of this, I would say ignorance on many levels about this sort of, frankly, I think it's related to why we don't comprehend things like chronic illness very well, or like some things, anything that's like ecological or like climate change to an extent. There's just no, like we human beings, as we have our society now to reinforce our beliefs, don't really deal with these. We're kind of like, oh well, that doesn't exist. Or like I can't see that. There's not, but in reality, I think it's much more true that actually, yes, this just because we don't see it, this timeline of trajectory development of factors is there. Like it's operating, it's not just figmentally there. It's like it's putting force. It's something weighing on the trajectory of development. And I think we don't talk about that. We don't. If it is, it's like extremely not mainstream. I'm sure there's theories and ideas, but like they're not. I think a future civilization, hundreds of years from now, perhaps, if it turns out okay, if they get to a place to see it, like I feel like that would be something that's, there was a radio show I was listening to, a sports show, but they're looking back at The Running Man, like on these old sci-fi movies of like, like Total Recall. I think is a great example of the movie versus the book and how this is the perception of what technology was at the time, and like he's got a big giant baseball-sized transmitter in his nose that he pulls out, just so people can understand it's in his nose. Like, in reality, it would be like
tiny,
you like not even able to hold it in your hand to show to a camera, or some other biometric stuff. And it's just like I feel like what we're talking about here is absolutely that thing where it's just there's no. It's almost like heretical now, a bit. I don't want to go full like Galileo stuff, but just there's such a derision towards it. But in reality, it's just there.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right. Yeah. Let's move on. I wanted to talk about this one other thing. This is something that Ira Rai, who was in the meeting several weeks ago, talked about, and we didn't know what it was. So, and I've been meaning to present this, but we didn't have time. So, these are what they call event cameras, and there's like there was a comment in the chat, I think, many weeks ago. So this is an event camera. So this is an event camera represents a shift towards next generation performance and efficiency for computer vision. And so this is actually based on neuromorphic engineering principles. So this is a type of electronic design and implementation that mimics biology. The fundamental premise is that biology has evolved over time to make us extremely efficient and adaptable as a species. So taking cues from these traits, they're going to give the neuromorphic spiel, but the idea is that you're using this for vision. You're using a sort of a neuromorphic aspect of vision. Basically, they want to mimic how the mammalian eye works, which is to see and process information in an event-based manner. Event-based vision is based on the idea that, like the human eye, machines can operate more effectively if they only process changes in a scene instead of processing everything in a scene all the time. So it's basically like you get this template of what's in the environment. This is the sensor here. It just takes an outline of this person. And then, it builds on that. So you get the outline, you get the template, and then you just record the changes. And that's all the camera's acquiring, as opposed to a normal camera where you'd have to take frame after frame of the person. Even if they're sitting still, you're getting frames. That's your refresh rate. In the case of a neuromorphic camera, you get the outline of the person, and then if there are changes in that outline, you record them. Otherwise, you skip over them and don't sample.
There's actually similar technologies now for monitoring. Like it'll basically take a frame of an environment, and it's basically the same concept. Just and it's not. I don't think it's as fancy as neuromorphic necessarily here, but it's just taking a picture of a room, and then it can kind of deduce. Okay, someone has entered the room, because it's not tracking. It's tracking the changes in a specific way too. Like did someone fall? Did someone change? Is there a rapid movement? Is there multiple people in the room? It's kind of taking this space. And I don't know if you're going to dovetail into like Gibsonian information about this.
Yes.
But, yeah.
So that was the idea. Like if you read the Gibsonian information stuff we've been working on, that's kind of the idea, is that you get this, you're detecting differences in the structure of like a visual stimulus or the motion, differences because of motion. So like if I had a fish swarm in a fish bowl, and I have a camera trained on that, and the fish are moving around, you'd get a template of like the fish swarm, and then maybe like the structure of it, and then that would be and then you'd record the differences, and those differences would be the Gibsonian information. Basically, what are the changes in the image as you go along? So that's kind of the idea there too. So there are links there, and so. But what I find here interesting, besides like the camera performance aspects, which is to say it improves camera efficiency, energy efficiency, acquisition efficiency. It can help with different lighting conditions. But there's this set of applications that we have. So there are all sorts of applications in automation and autonomous mobility, which means putting them on robots and getting like these naturalistic scenes and and using them as like a way for the robot to do, action perception sorts of things. But there's also AR and VR. And so I think with AR, also mobile devices, but AR and VR I think is a really interesting area because there's a lot of need for kind of like rendering scenes and, deep, rich scenes with a lot of information, but like not necessarily, maybe displayed in to the image, through the cameras that are available, maybe the screens that are available in the headset or something. But you have to be like efficient with how you present that, the information flow and so forth. So a lot of headsets don't have infinite memory, infinite RAM, and they have like a camera setup that's like optimized for reducing visual artifact or reducing like motion sickness or something. So there's strategies that one might need to use to acquire and present information from the world outside of outside of the headset, or even things like in a rendered scene where you're rendering motion or something like that. So it's a very interesting approach. And so yeah, again, this is like a different way of doing it. You get there's a sampling paradigm shift here between normal cameras, and there's a lot of issues related to dynamic range and pixel sensitivity that are also important. So that's all I'm going to talk about with the event cameras now, but like that's something I think that's applicable to a lot of areas that we're interested in.
Yeah, very cool.
And now I'm going to go very quickly over this week's project management. It wasn't very long, but it was informative, I think, for maybe some of what maybe you're interested in making money off of your projects, or, if you're doing an open source project, you might want to have a funding strategy for that. We do a lot of things here where we don't really have a clear funding strategy, and there are reasons for that. But anyways, I've gone over this, and this is kind of funding economics and commercialization of projects and of open source. This is not exhaustive, but I went over some topics that I found in the literature, things to ponder, things to think about. So the state of open source software is basically you can't develop software without doing open source. We want to lower the barriers to innovation, and it helps with economic growth. It helps with empowering people and all this. So there's an awesome economics of open source. This is the article that this idea comes from. Basically, we have this opportunity to have a new type of economic system emerge where we do things differently than what we've done in what we might call industrial capitalism, or like the standard workplace or the standard organization. And so there's a changing economics of open source. So back in the 1990s, it was very simple to do, like, have an open source ecosystem. We just had a lot of open source tools. People could pick one up and build something. So like Linux, you could build from virtually nothing. You had like these open languages, open tools, like, compilers and things, and you could just build from that and really make, a pretty substantial project for almost no money. But the problem, of course, was that you had too many small enterprises that weren't really coordinated, or, they get overused without the proper investment. So, if I create a tool and I just kind of put it out there and don't maintain it, or don't get any financial support for maintaining it, it just dies off, or it just becomes obsolete. So, there are ways around this. One big thing is licensing, which enforces maintenance. In other words, if other people use your tool and they don't maintain, if you want to be able to enforce compliance with, like, basically maintaining the tool, so it's there for not only for yourself but for everyone in the ecosystem. So licensing terms will enforce this. And licensing, you think, what does that have to do with economics? But I'll remind you that a lot of our modern capitalism modern economic systems are underpinned by things like property rights and licensing terms, and those are things really that drive a lot of economic activity, not necessarily just the money part of it. So this is, you don't want to be restrictive, you don't want to be punitive, but you do want to have some sort of legal regime that enforces maintenance or other things in that ecosystem. So basically, you had a lot of small organizations that didn't really have any strong connections with one another. So you just pick up a tool, use it. It might be obsolete. It might be that you use someone else's work without attribution, that sort of thing. We talked about open source licenses. You might also encourage larger entities to fork your project. So if they do the development on their own, you might just be the supplier of something that's useful to other people. But there's, it creates incentives for investment. It creates, say, you might say, I'm going to create this small tool. People can use it and fork it as long as you keep it open and free. And so that means that other organizations can develop it, but there's an imperative to keep that open to other people. So it's always available, but it gets invested in. You could also fork code from other organizations and develop internally and customize these tools for commercialization purposes. So the dilemma is how to make money from something you give away for free. And like I said, licensing is important in different terms. So, you have all these different types of open source license. You have Creative Commons licenses. They have different terms. You can specify whether something can or cannot be used for commercial gain, can or cannot be used without attribution. Most of them allow you to copy and publish. Most of them require some form of attribution. But how to organize all that is the question. Then open source licenses are the same way. They also have a lot more, limitations in terms of like how things are used. They're also generative AI licenses. So if you're doing generative AI systems, you have a set of generative licenses because they've posed their own unique challenges, both in terms of training data and in terms of what gets produced. So, there are all these things where we want to leverage the degree of open in your project and some of those licensing terms. How can you do this to make money for your project? So you can, there are different strategies for self-licensing things. You can be in charge of your own project, or you can negotiate with large corporations like Amazon. A lot of times, like like Amazon or Microsoft, they'll use open source software. They'll maybe acquire an open source organization, or they'll just strike a license with them because it's actually quite useful for what they do. You can, you want to be open for purposes of marketing or crowdsourcing, but you also want to restrict the projects for practical purposes. So if there's valuable content you really want to market or some security concern, then you can do that. So there's this flexibility, but also the strategy for, marketing parts of it. There are different strategies. Different groups have done this. Redis Labs has done they license components of their products. So some of these components are not open. It could be some module that's not open versus the rest of the software that's open. Red Hat does things like sell support. So you have like support for you have an open source product, but you support it and you sell that support to organizations or individuals. And then HashiCorp, they build proprietary software based on open source components. So that could be like putting the software in a robot or in some sort of autonomous system where you have to configure everything and sell it as a package. And so that's another strategy. So you keep the core software open, but you're selling some derivative of it. And so, if you have an overly restrictive open source license or set of conditions, it can be a problem. It can lead to things like long-term litigation, and you want to avoid that whenever possible. So there's this guy, Adam Jacob, who's come up with some principles for financially sustainable free and open source communities. He kind of goes through this in his website where he kind of talks about how to keep open source projects sustainable, but also financially sustainable, which is to say, you don't want to you want to be able to have an income stream. And so then we talked about different types of open source foundation. The 501c3 is often used, and there are some limitations. It's technically a nonprofit organization, but you can raise money through it. So it's kind of like not really a charity, but it's also not a for-profit organization. So I kind of went through the legal aspects of that. We kind of went through a couple of big foundations to see how they make their money. Mozilla makes it through a host of different sources. They have an endowment, which they get interest off of. They also make it from other areas. And so you have assets, liabilities, and net assets. So you want your assets to be bigger than your liabilities. Linux does it a bit differently. Like I said before, most of their income comes from program services where they sell support. And it's interesting that they didn't found their foundation right away. It took them like 8 years, or actually 12 years, to found a foundation on top of their open source project. So it's interesting how there was a delay between building the open source platform and then getting this foundation up and running, which then manages their finances, manages their community, and so forth. They also use a 501c6, so there are a bunch of 501c type organizations, and you can pick the one that's best for you. And of course, yes, you can make money with open source. There are different strategies. This is just one of them, this a la carte service contract system, but there are other ways to do it as well. And so then there are also grants that you can apply for. So there are different things like sponsoring organizations like NumFocus, where they sponsor organizations to go for grants, but also give out small scale grants for organizations for things like, hiring a maintainer or hiring a developer for a short period of time. And then there are other small scale fellowships like our Summer of Code and the Google Season of Docs, which allow you to do something very focused for maybe a summer, and you get an intern who's funded, and you get this work output. So there are different strategies for doing that. The second lecture was sort of more on grant writing, talking about small business grants, talking about different types of grants that you can do: operating support, capital support, and program development. Then there's technology transfer, which is actually, a lot of times universities love this because they have a lot of research labs, and they can take ideas from those labs and turn them into profitable businesses. But the problem is it's not a common thing. It's very rare to find something that ends up being profitable. So there's this whole technology transfer area. And I went through some of this with the students in the class. Basically, it's this cycle of going from pure research or some sort of ill-defined research problem ill-defined in terms of commercialization, to assessing the marketplace, marketing, finding a license regime like a patent or copyright, marketing this, finding a licensee perhaps, or marketing the technology to partners, and then you basically commercialize it. You try to find your niche in the market, you gain revenue, and then you reinvest that in a number of ways. So this whole cycle, of the thousands of applications they get, maybe a handful actually make it through this cycle. But it's interesting to think about in terms of a project, because that's kind of what we're doing with projects as we get them out into the world. And we may not commercialize them formally, but we do sell them, even ideas, kind of informally. So there is this aspect of finding a place for it. And I don't want to extend that metaphor too much, but technology transfer has its place in kind of funding projects that are technologically oriented. There are different roles that people play in this process: disseminators, sponsors, developers, and implementers, and they all kind of do their own thing. You have to make people aware of the technologies. You have to provide political and financial support, scale up the fruits of research and development, and develop users and customers. So there's also Wardley mapping, which is an idea of how to visualize these different things, how to visualize your path from like an idea, what you want to put into a product, the challenges are, and then how to get those things into place. And then thinking about those in terms of a value chain. So how valuable are they? So in this case, you have a value chain from like of a online photo sharing platform, from like the customer and the things that are visible to the customer, the things downstream that are invisible to the customer, but require some like purchasing or investment or whatever. And so this shows you this map, Wordly map of this whole series of things you need to think about. And then finally, I talked about decentralized autonomous organizations. I put it in here mainly because it's out in the world and people need to think about it a little bit. It's basically something that's tied to like using like tokenizing groups of people who are, it's ostensibly democratic in that you have people hold tokens and then they vote on ideas. So you have these smart contracts that come up for a vote and you vote on them, and you have a number of tokens, which are usually some sort of cryptocurrency or something that allow you to make a decision in the group. And then all the votes and activity are posted on the blockchain. And there are security issues with this. People sell this as security centric, but it's really not. I just wanted to make sure people understood that because it doesn't seem like that's very understood a lot of times when people talk about it. Now, when we talk about smart contracts in the blockchain, this is really an algorithmic approach to financing things and organizing things and governing. So an algocracy is this idea of running sort of social processes and these other types of economic processes through algorithms. And that's a lot of people think that's the future, but it's a good question as to whether that's viable or not. But in any case, I think you have to ask yourself, what kind of solution works for your own organization. But that's my approach to commercialization and making money on projects and that sort of thing. That's the end of the class, the formal end of the class of the lectures. So I'm going to teach this again in the summer, virtually to a virtual course. So it'll be like on Zoom. But yeah, so now I have a bunch of lectures worked out. Now I can modify them, but I have all the topics and lectures worked out.
Yeah. I know there was sort of a paper component or something component, and obviously I haven't done any of that, but I'd be happy to do more with it during the summer too.
Yeah.
I think it's a really important course. I really like this lecture too, the technology life cycle and kind of talking about that stuff. It fits quite nicely with what we talked about earlier this lecture, earlier in this lab meeting today too.
Okay. Yeah, great. So that's all I had for that. Now, I know that Amanda's been waiting patiently. And she'd like to do her, I guess I did not share my screen. Okay. So yeah, we'd like to hear about your thing, your notes.
Yeah, let me see if I can use my technology.
Okay.
So yeah, this was from the Clark and Hansen collection, Heinz von Forester's Demons. And I remember reading and I was like, well, I do understand Maxwell's demon. I'm familiar with that idea, but I was confused by von Forester's version. And I think I understand what's going on. Okay.
Here we go.
There we go.
Right. Oh, I have an echo. I don't know how to turn that off.
You have to mute either the iPad or your computer. Okay, are you?
You muted both of them now.
Yeah.
So one of them will have to turn off or turn on. This happens like all the time when I use multiple screens.
Yeah, it's challenging.
I have to mute my use like other monitor.
Here we go.
Okay.
Nice.
Less of an echo now.
Yeah, it's fine.
Share screen.
Great.
Where is it though?
Here we go.
Great. Okay. Man, I'm still getting a little bit of an echo.
It's okay. Yeah.
It's actually not bad for us.
Yeah. it's
Okay,
fine.
good. So von Forester was interested in explaining how self-organizing systems work, how there seems to be an increase in order. Specifically, what he means by order is this like relative notion. So he uses Shannon's definition of redundancy to quantify it. So the order of a system is dependent on the information entropy, so H, the ratio of that to the total maximum possible entropy of the system. So this definition of order that he's using has these two variables. So in self-organizing systems, this R is increasing. And there are two dynamics that can contribute to this. The total information entropy of the system decreases, or the maximum possible entropy of the system increases. And then for each of these dynamics, there is one of von Forester's daemons. So the internal daemon works to decrease the entropy of the system by decreasing H. So changing the probability distribution or shifting conditional probabilities by establishing ties between elements such that H is going to decrease. Basically doing work within the system to increase order, decrease entropy. The external daemon is more like what Maxwell's daemon is, which is like this gatekeeper, admitting elements to the system that keeps the entropy constant, but increases the maximum possible disorder, maximum possible order. So going back to that ratio, it increases H max.
Okay.
So let's see if I can use my tools. Great. So you have a system, you have the external daemon, which is allowing only certain elements into the system. The rest is the environment. And then you have the internal daemon that is taking elements of the system and basically creating structure, whatever that might look like. So it's decreasing the entropy, increasing the order by increasing order inside the system. And then the external daemon is selectively letting things in that don't increase the disorder. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
So yeah, the external daemon is kind of like Maxwell's daemon. It's a gatekeeper that only allows certain things into the system based on whether or not it would increase or decrease order. And then the internal daemon is doing this, it's still a mysterious process that von Forester doesn't really explain, that involves involves building structure from the elements.
Right.
So there's 2 daemons, and then the efforts are coupled, so they can like pick up each other's slack. Oops. The 2 daemons can pick up each other's slack. So if the external daemon slows down, the internal daemon can keep increasing structure from the ingredients it has, from the building blocks that are already inside the system. And then if the internal daemon slows down, then the external daemon can just make sure that the elements getting into the system are ordered enough that it doesn't increase the entropy.
Right.
So there are limits to how much slack the internal daemon can pick up, according to von Forester, because the organizing efforts require the building materials that the external daemon's efforts provide. So if the external daemon remains lazy too long, the internal daemon will have nothing to build on and his output will diminish. And then you won't have a self-organizing system anymore.
Yeah.
One open question is what happens when the internal daemon remains lazy too long? Like, is there an asymmetry here? Because it seems like, just looking at the equation, if the external daemon maintains its efforts, then you can have a system whose organization, whose order is increasing without the internal daemon's work, it seems.
Yeah.
And then one last thing I wanted to mention, 2 more things. One, von Forester cites Schrodinger, which I thought was interesting. Schrodinger came up with an order from order principle, and he talks about like metabolism as the essential thing. So the essential thing in metabolism is that the organism succeeds in freeing itself from all the entropy it cannot help producing while alive. So focusing in on the mechanism of the internal daemon, it's supposed to be connected to metabolism in real systems, living systems. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is the order from noise principle. So if you remember the illustration in the paper with the cubes and then this like abstract art looking figure, von Forester illustrates the work of the daemons by saying, like, imagine you have a bunch of magnetic cubes. They start out in disarray, but then you imagine they're all in a box. And then you shake the box, and then they all hook up with each other, and you get this seemingly very ordered shape. So he says, well, how does that happen? You add energy to the system, not order, but energy, and then the daemons increase the order. So the daemons here are supposed to be properties of the individual elements in the system, something to do with the intrinsic structural properties of each part of the system. So what they would actually be depends on the system. In this case, it's magnets, but he's trying to say that in living systems, these daemons correspond to real processes, which seemed different from Maxwell's daemon.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I have.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, this is a great overview. Thank you for presenting it. Can you share this at all? I don't know how you get it out of this format. I mean, what are you using for this?
This is Pages. It's Apple's.
Oh, okay, Pages.
But I can share it.
Yeah, that's good.
I'll maybe try to make a nicer diagram.
Yeah, so that's great.
I think I'll put this would be a great thing. I could put all that in Notion somewhere. That is really, really, really nice.
Yeah. So, I think one of the things I take away from this is we often talk about closed systems and we talk about thermodynamics or there's a default to think about systems as closed. In other words, like you have a certain amount of energy and you say, okay, well, there's a loss of energy over time, that's entropy, and then things will tend towards this sort of random state or, minimal energy or whatever. But a lot of living systems are open. So the open system aspect is where you have things that are constantly coming into the system and constantly moving through the system. And so, if you have like an order or an order producing set of mechanisms, like say, for example, transcriptional or translational process, where you have things that are you have a polymerase that goes across the stretch of DNA and produces RNAs that are of a certain sequence type, and then it's producing a large number of them, which then have like this information. I mean, the energy for that process is constantly moving through the system. So you might think that transcription would run down in a cell over time, but it really doesn't. Sometimes if you like suspend the mechanism or something, you can get that to work, but the process is open, is my point, which is to say, you have energy constantly coming through, you have information constantly coming through the body in terms of like sensory information and other types of, positional information and things like that. And it's constantly changing. So you have this, instead of saying like you have something that's, a shot of something and then it's fixed and then you move on. And that's kind of what we do in a lot of our experiments, by the way, is we give like a fixed reference point and we say, here's a trial and we're going to do something like maybe study metabolism or study perception. We're going to give the stimulus and then we're going to let the system kind of move in a closed state and then see what it does. But that's not the way biology works or perception works or anything, it's always open. So I like the idea of, demons being these mechanisms maybe that are imposing order. And the mechanism could be anything, I guess. And then having this flow of energy, which is the sort of the currency of making, giving them something to do or giving them something to produce, producing order, I think is interesting.
Yeah, so after our reading group where we first talked about this, I felt like I understood the significance of or like the order from noise principle, the order from, I think he says like cheap undirected energy, so unordered noisy energy. But as long as there's energy, if the system has certain properties, it can create order from that. And that's what we see in living systems. So I thought it was interesting that that's what he was trying to tackle. I also feel like I have a better understanding now of how he was connecting the like energetic notion of entropy with the information theory notion. That was one thing that the chapter stressed, and I was like, I don't quite see how that follows from these equations.
Yeah.
But I think I see now.
Well, there's also Landauer who did a lot of work on like merging the two, bringing the two together. I'm meaning to do this talk where I kind of bring those together. So I'm going to kind of go into that a bit more. There's like it's like the people have tried to reconcile the two sets of equations because they are very similar in their structure, whether that's because one was influenced by the other or whether they're actually measuring like convergent things, we don't really know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess people have tried to show that they're actually capturing something in the world that's like parallel. So, but yeah, I think that's really good, and I like the idea of like looking at H max versus H, and so you're looking at H max in the system, H in the system, and then H max can change under some conditions. H changes, of course, too, and then you get this ratio, which is going to be. I know in DivaWorm I've talked about last week. I think we talked about phase portraits or phase diagrams where you have like two parameters that are on a bivariate graph, and then you have different regions where they predict certain things. So if H max is high and H is also high, that's a ratio value that gives you some output. Versus like if H max is low and H is high, that gives you another output. And they're just like regions that you draw on a map. And so it's like, yeah.
So one region would be where, so he says that like the external daemon always has to be doing something because the internal daemon needs the supplies. So that would be maybe one region, but then I had a question that was left unanswered about what would happen if the external daemon kept increasing H max, so kind of just like growing, like inflating the system without changing its order, just by adding the right elements.
Yeah.
What happens when that dynamic is happening and H max is increasing and the internal daemon isn't doing anything? It seemed like there was an asymmetry here where if the external daemon stops, then the internal daemon runs out of fuel and the system collapses, or at least it like stops being self-organizing. Maybe it hits like a stable state, but it's not growing, it's not increasing order anymore. But then what happens when the internal daemon stops and the external daemon keeps growing the system?
Yeah.
So like exploring the different parts of that phase diagram.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too is like we think of like self-organization as like this, we've talked about top-down and bottom-up processes. So we have top-down things where there's like some enforcement of like constraints, and then bottom-up where you have like information coming and telling it. So I mean, there's this bottom-up and top-down process usually in something like emergence or self-assembly, where you have things that, you know, like a crystal that has to form and build a structure. So yeah, I don't know what the mapping would be between the daemons on that, but like that would be kind of interesting to think about as well. I mean, like we're revisiting cybernetics. We talk about that. We've been revisiting the every good regulator theorem, and then this is another good one to kind of focus on.
Yeah, a lot of really good things from all this, and I hope maybe we can talk more about it Wednesday too or beyond. It's been, I have this strange Tetris analogy that comes to my mind when we're talking about all this stuff about like what's put in and how's it organized in the bottom, and I'm going to think about that more because I don't know how to get to my interesting points about it, but it's sort of this thing. Another concept is like I'm totally on board and digging that we're calling this a daemon, because I think it's so like, it's almost like science. It's like daemon has been used to explain this like anti-scientific stuff forever, you know.
Yeah.
And now it's like we're kind of recycling it. It's like, yeah, there's a function at play that we don't know what to talk about, and we're gonna make some supernatural entity that decides this. Like that's perfect. Like that's great. Like that's exactly what we're doing. It may not even be a centralized entity. Like it's like praying to the god of the weather god. The weather god controls all this stuff. Like, does it? Like, is that really, you know? But like functionally in our capacity, like yeah, it works perfectly well. And I feel like I almost feel celebratory. Like yes, like let's talk about the demons or like these like figures that are at play, totally knowing that they're like aware, like self-aware, like talk about things. Like yeah, that's like awesome and so valid.
It like acknowledges and it honors that there's mystery.
Yeah, and then like it honors the mystery, and it's like, and there's a function here that's actually there. Like there's some appearance of it, and I feel like even like dipping into some of the stuff we talked about before, like the whole A-Life Ghost and the Machine stuff. Like this is some of like the good, like these ghost and demon terminologies. I think are actually really legit in a ways that I didn't really consider it this way before until your talk. So thank you for that. Last thing I'll say is, and I want to definitely talk about this more Wednesday, I really want to dive into the metabolism commentary more.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And real quick, one reason for that is when thinking about the demons and what they could, you know, actually be in cells and like living systems, this bioelectricity work from Levin and others I shared something in the Slack that came out recently that's starting to be a review of that literature. I thought it was funny that magnetic cubes is what von Forester used to illustrate this, because one main point of the paper is that the polarization of molecules can explain a tremendous amount of biological systems, the actions of autopoietic systems. Yeah, going back to metabolism and real living systems, it seems like maybe we can locate the demons in somewhere in this bioelectricity paradigm.
Which one? Do you remember where you shared that in Slack? Because I missed it entirely.
It's in biological evolution. That channel. Yeah.
Okay, the significance of bioelectricity with funk. Nice.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna put that in.
Yeah, that's a review article. So yeah.
Okay. Cool. Very cool. So you basically covered everything I was gonna say, but it's metabolism and there's if Avery was here, we kind of come from background where the certain metabolism talked about in certain ways, mostly pseudoscientific ways, but information metabolism and sort of yeah, I'll leave it at that. But very cool stuff. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Even I think we might even segment out two things I've considered before. I won't be able to do it, but if we had if I could just hire someone in the money that I don't have to segment all of our videos and we're going to segment, this would be an awesome segment. And secondly, what I can do more easily is I'd plug in on for orthogonal lab discussion series. I'm envisioning this thing. Won't be maybe through the summer I could work on it, but having these discussion series, kind of like Commonwealth Club or Learning Salon, but tailored to these different topics. I think this would be an amazing something in my mind is a discussion that lead to much more discussion. So very good stuff. I think that's it. I think that's we're going to move on to another topic because I was going to say something, but I'm gonna wait on anything else. I don't have anything else to share this week myself.
Okay, yeah. Well, I did want to share one last thing, and we're not going to do papers this week, but I will talk about this thing that I had here. So let's see. So this is Luis Rocha is he does a lot of stuff with complexity, and I think he's actually at SUNY Binghamton. So he's
I know that place.
Yeah, and they have a complexity theory type organization there, a department, I guess. And he does this. He's doing this stuff. I think he has it's either a series, it's a class with a set of topics in it.
Yeah.
But I've taken this from the website. I don't remember what the URL is, but it's where this course ISE 483, SSIE 583. And so this is a series of things that he's done on different topics. This topic is von Neumann and natural selection. So as you know, von Neumann was a computer scientist and mathematician. And you're what does von Neumann have to do with natural selection? You usually associate that with Darwin and biologists. So this kind of goes through. There's been this interest in natural selection from computational scientists, from genetic programming to other areas of complexity theory. So this quote here from Brenner: Turing invented the stored program computer. And von Neumann showed that the description is separate from the universal constructor, which is this universal constructor is something that von Neumann developed as a self-reproducing automata. So he developed, it's kind of if you know anything about cellular automata, you know that there are these grids where the cells are, constantly evolving based on their neighbor's state, and so they flicker on and off, and you can get different patterns that you can describe with different rule sets. So you could produce like a pattern like Rule 120 with certain rules implemented across this grid, and it gives you a pattern that looks maybe something like it's biological. So this is not, so Turing invented the stored program computer. Von Neumann showed that its description is separate from the universal constructor. This is not trivial. Physicist Erwin Schrödinger confused the program and the constructor in his 1944 book, What is Life?, which actually Amanda had cited in her description of von Forester's demons. I guess it was in the von Forester paper, but it's yeah. So this is a very famous book by Erwin Schrödinger about, like, it's basically the seed book for biophysics. It's the idea of, like, I'm a physicist, I want to talk about life and give some thoughts about what it is. And then in this book, Schrödinger saw chromosomes as the architect's plan and the builder's craft in one. So he's definitely he has this idea that DNA is like a blueprint for the phenotype, or, and of course, we've been working from that metaphor for many years. We sequenced the human genome, and now we've been trying to figure out function, or at least, like, from those sequences, what the blueprint produces. We found that, like, there's a lot of variation there that isn't maybe computer-like in this, or like in the traditional notion of architecture. So, I mean, there's some problems with the metaphor in terms of, like, the mapping. What does the mapping look like between genotype and phenotype? So, that's something that is interesting. I don't know how much it can, but anyways, in this quote, he says, "This is wrong." So this is, the code scripts contain only a description of the executive function, not the function itself. So what he means, I guess, is that the script, or the code, contains the description of the function, not the function itself. So it just gives you a description. Then, there are other processes that are involved in the actual function. So what that would mean would be like the DNA describes maybe, or provides a description of the phenotype, but the phenotype itself is not the code. It's the genotype plus maybe environmental influences or interactions between genes, or other types of things that you see. So it's very much different from this idea that there's this blueprint in the architectural sense. So, I mean, I don't know if that's something we follow up on, or if it's like interesting to people from the standpoint of cybernetics, or what. But in any case, von Neumann's self-reproduction scheme is this idea of the self-reproducing automata. It's this thing, this autonomous system, or this cellular automata that can reproduce. And so reproduction, of course, is a hallmark of life. So if you have one hallmark of life, usually, is that it can reproduce itself. Viruses reproduce themselves. Animals reproduce themselves. Plants reproduce themselves in different ways. Either through selfing, or through, like, sexual reproduction, or other types of things. Cells divide, and they can make copies of themselves. So this is something. And even information, you can think of this as, like, information is reproducing, and sometimes even self-reproducing. So, like, in systems like, AI systems, information could be self-reproduced, and that has implications for, a lot of things. So von Neumann thought of his logical model of self-reproduction as an answer to the observation that, unlike machines, biological organisms have the ability to self-replicate, while seemingly increasing their complexity without limit. So they can, like a species could originate from a small group of organisms. They could reproduce, and increase their number very much. And then, of course, evolve, and then form new lineages. So there's this increase in complexity, increase in number of species that result from, like, maybe like a ancestral species. You could have a number of individuals, all with their own phenotypic complexity, and this this complexity is without limit, at least according to von Neumann. There are other ways that like you can, there may be limits to things, but we don't know what those are. So that's the idea. Mechanical artifacts are instead produced via more complicated factories as opposed to self-production, and can only degenerate in their complexity. So he's contrasting that with a mechanical artifact, which is like, maybe like a mechanical system. Although, we're getting like, robots that can self-assemble. So, that might be, we might be blurring that line a bit. But generally, I think this is like, speaks to this idea of entropy that Amanda talked about, where you have this daemon that can produce order versus like something that is a closed system that only degenerates and doesn't have, well, I don't want to say it's a special sauce, but it's a living system versus a mechanical system. The living system has these daemons of some, whatever they are, that allow you to do the self-assembly, self-organization, self-reproduction in this case. Mechanical artifacts do not. He was searching for a threshold of complexity beyond which machines self-reproduce with no outside control, while possibly increasing their complexity. So von Neumann proposed these machines that were digital, and they had this universal constructor from a code. This gives a description, and then you have these copying mechanisms, these operations, and these extra functions, which then allow you to they get self-reproduced, and they produce a phenotype of some type where they produce an output. And then that's what you're getting with these self-reproducing machines, or these digital machines. I don't know how you describe them. He was searching for a threshold complexity. Von Neumann concluded that this threshold entails a memory stored description that can be interpreted by a universal constructor automaton A, which is this, to produce any automaton X. So it's like you have this description, it's stored in a memory, it's like DNA. It produces this universal constructor automaton A, which is the parent, and it's used to produce an automaton X, which is the child. If a description of A is fed into A itself, then a new copy of A is obtained. So it's self-reproduction, it's cloning. It can produce a new copy of itself. However, to avoid a logical paradox of self-reference, the description, which cannot describe itself, must both be copied, uninterpreted rule, and translated, interpreted rule, into the described automaton. So we just talked about with translation in biology. Copying is just a clone, right? It's like you just make a copy. In translation, what happens is there's a polymerase. It makes a copy of the DNA as RNA, which is a little bit different than DNA. So it's a sequence, it's a short sequence of the DNA. But sometimes you can get errors in transcription. Sometimes, downstream, the transcripts will go to translation, and then there will be further bias amongst the different codons that do the translation, or you'll get mutations, and so, or deletions and things like that. So there's this, it's not cloning, it's a different process. So the biological system is different than the computational system he's describing here. But basically you have this sort of structure where you have the copy or the clone and the translated or the interpreted set of instructions. So this goes to the described automaton. This way, in addition to the universal constructor, an automaton B is capable of copying any description included in the self-replication scheme. So B is different from A. The universal constructor, which is this here, this allows us to construct from A, and C then is a third automaton, which is included to perform all the manipulation of descriptions necessary, a sort of operating system. So C is here. This is where the operations take place. So B is the copier. C is where you get these transformations of these operations. And then to sum it up, the self-replicating system contains a set of automata A plus B plus C. It's additive, and a description and the description is fed to B, which copies it 3 times, assuming destruction of the original. One of these copies is then fed to A, which produces another automaton. The separate copy is handled separately, and then the third copy is kept so the self-reproducing capability may be maintained. So this is all like, the system of replication so this is a very much a biological sort of metaphor for like doing this in a computational system. But this is his sort of description of self-replication, and then that leads us to natural selection on those variants that get produced, because you get a bunch of these replicators that get produced, they have variation, and then you can apply natural selection to that variation to say if they have certain traits, they might survive at a certain frequency. If they have other traits, they might be selected out of the population because they can't reproduce. It's always about reproduction, natural selection. Natural selection, basically, if you don't reproduce, or if you reproduce less than other individual copies in the population, then you are, less, your frequency is decreased. And sometimes you can go extinct, sometimes you can take over the entire population. But if you think of natural selection as this population of replicators that replicate themselves and then, are very successful to varying degrees, then that's basically what he means by natural selection. Notice that the description or program is used in two different ways. It is both translated and copied. In the first row, it controls the construction of an automaton by causing a sequence of activities in the machine. Von Neumann named it the active role of information. In the second row, the description is simply copied without reference to its meaning, or the passive role of information. So in other words, the interpreted description controls construction, and the uninterpreted description is copied separately, passing along that stored information or memory to the next generation. So they talk about memory as being like this thing. We talk about, in DevaWorm, we talk about early life and like the origins of life. And a lot of times people will refer to DNA or RNA in the case of early life as a memory. It's basically, how do you store information for your replicant? So when you replicate yourself, how do you store the information? And, it's like early life, there might be some scheme where molecules are enclosed in a vesicle or something, but that's not necessarily a memory. It's just an enclosure mechanism. You need to have a memory where you can go back and reference what the phenotype should look like, or the instruction set should look like. So it's not just a mapping of like a gene to a phenotype. There's this, it's not a linear mapping, it's a very nonlinear mapping. And so this parallels the horizontal and vertical transmission of genetic information in biological organisms, which is all the more remarkable since von Neumann proposed a scheme before the structure of the DNA molecule was uncovered by Watson and Crick in 1953, though after the Avery McLeod-McCarty experiment, which identified DNA as the carrier of genetic information. So they're floating around with these ideas, and of course, von Neumann was able to sort of identify this relationship before we really had a handle on DNA itself. But this is all, computational sort of analogy. So this von Neumann replicator, it's a complicated thing to work with. Implementations of this automaton appeared only fairly recently in the 90s. So, this was an idea that was ahead of its time. It required a lot of computational power, but von Neumann was all about like theory. So von Neumann famously said that by formalizing the problem, perhaps he was throwing away the baby with the bathwater. Clearly, he was interested in the material aspects that allow organisms and machines to evolve. And then I'm not going to get into this last part, but it talks about open-ended evolution and natural selection. And that's, of course, another topic, but it's very relevant to a lot of things, not just biological evolution, but like complex systems. So, do you have any questions about that or comments?
I have a comment. I watched a lecture from Dennis Noble, also linked to in the bioevolution Slack. Well, Morgan shared a link, and then that one was behind a paywall, and so I shared a YouTube lecture. But I just shared a screen cap of part of that lecture where he's talking about how looking at just like DNA replication is such a tiny part of the activity of biological networks. And the way he was talking about it resembled this like interpreted versus uninterpreted distinction. Yeah, that's really interesting.
That's great. I think that's an interesting point. It definitely there's stuff to follow up here. There's this whole genotype phenotype problem, which is where you have how do you get to a phenotype from a genotype? Is it just like a translation of genes, or is there what are the environmental influences? How do genes in a network interact? Because there are genetic networks that it's not just genes, it's a genetic network. So how does that all work, and what are the contributions? And that's always an interesting question. I think it's interesting from the standpoint of a lot of the cybernetic stuff. The von Neumann replicators are kind of orthogonal to that, in that you have these, if you can think about them as cybernetic systems that replicate, what are the conditions for replicating it? Are the different regulatory elements, how do they get, you think about a cybernetic system as a single thing, like a little single diagram or a single set of relations, but we're really talking about this dynamical system where we have all these different representations of the system, and we have to kind of figure out which one is correct, or how the system shifts from one to the other. And so
very cool. We had a few people join also. I don't know if anybody wants to. I can't see one of them, Philologist or just.
Oh, Jyothi, hello.
Hey, Jyothi.
Jyothi is DevaWorm, working on DevaWorm, I think. Working on the website and that. I don't know who fellow Jitster is, but well, welcome. We're kind of at the end of the meeting, so I don't know. Okay, that's fine. But yeah, I mean, thanks for attending. We're gonna. This has been recorded, so we'll have it on YouTube, and if you want to check it out, that would be great. But yeah, so thanks everyone.
Yep, talk to everybody next week. I'm really excited for Fashion Futures, and I'll say more about this paper last time too. This super cool. Even with being with Saffron and Levin and a really amazing that whole. I printed it out because oh man, I'm actually really flattered and proud to be in a group with all this stuff and just all of the articles. They're actually really cool. So maybe we'll talk more about that special issue next time. But yeah.
I had a question. Yeah, so you asked about GSOC. How many slots do we have? We don't know that yet. It'll probably be So hopefully we'll get at least 1 or 2 for DevaWorm, and then of course 1 or 2 for each project in orthogonal. We have 3 projects, of course, but I don't know how many they'll have available. Last year we got everyone we requested, so it's. I don't know if we're going to get that this year.
The year that I applied, there only 1 person out of 3 or 4 got it. Yeah. And then last year, everybody gets it this year. So hopefully, more the better. But there are, the different there's a lot of options. We'll see what happens.
Well, I would add that we will welcome anyone who wants to work on it. If you don't get funded, you can still work on a project, and we have ways to help you. Find a path forward with it. It could be for another project, another application cycle. It could be for, some sort of getting it out, getting it completed, maybe commercialized even. So I don't know what we have these working groups that result from the GSOC period, the application period. Sometimes people get funded, sometimes they don't, but we always have a pretty good session, and you'll learn a lot by being involved. So
yeah, we encourage that, and if some people need the money to do the stuff, but if you want to work on your project, we have people doing that already for other orthogonal lab projects this summer. some with academic credit to universities, some not. So there will be a space if you really want to go through your project either way, and we encourage that. But outside of that, I got to head out myself. So
All right. Have a good week. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.